There is a silent force that pulls people away from God every single hour. It doesn't come with loud alarms or obvious destruction. It works subtly, deep in the mind, shaping decisions, influencing actions, and ultimately leading to complete separation from the divine. Many people assume that the greatest dangers to their faith are external temptations, sins of the flesh, or the distractions of the world. But the real battle isn't fought in the physical realm, it happens within. Unbelief is the root of spiritual destruction. It is not just doubt, it is the complete rejection of divine truth. It starts small, just a moment of hesitation, a single question left unanswered, but like a seed planted in fertile soil, it grows, and the more it is fed, the stronger it becomes. The problem isn't that people have questions or struggles with their faith. The problem is when they allow their doubts to shape their reality. Faith is more than belief. It is an internal state that aligns with divine power. It is the foundation upon which all spiritual growth is built. But the moment unbelief enters, it weakens that foundation. It creates cracks in a person's trust in God, making room for fear, insecurity, and ultimately separation. This is how people slowly drift away, not in a single moment, but through a gradual decline. The human mind is designed to seek patterns and confirmation. Whatever we believe, we reinforce. If someone chooses to believe that God is distant, they will begin to notice everything that confirms that idea. Their prayers will feel empty. Their faith will seem ineffective. Their hope will weaken, not because God has changed, but because their mind has been conditioned to expect distance rather than presence. Every sin begins as a thought. Every limitation, every fear, every failure first takes root in the subconscious before it becomes an action. This is why unbelief is so dangerous. It doesn't just affect thoughts, it shapes destiny. When a person begins to doubt God's promises, they start making choices that reflect that doubt. They hesitate when they should act. They shrink back when they should move forward. They question when they should trust. And every time they allow doubt to win, they reinforce a pattern of unbelief. The most dangerous part of this is that it often feels logical. People convince themselves that they are just being realistic. They look at their circumstances, their struggles, their unanswered prayers, and conclude that faith is wishful thinking. But what they don't realize is that their reality is being shaped by their own expectations. If you expect failure, you will find failure. If you expect disappointment, you will find disappointment. Science has already proven that the brain is adaptable. Neurons that fire together wire together. This means that whatever thoughts you consistently entertain, you strengthen. When people constantly focus on their doubts, they are literally rewiring their brains to expect separation from God. And once that expectation is set, it begins to manifest in their daily lives. This is why some people struggle while others thrive. It's not about external circumstances, it's about internal alignment. A person who has trained their mind to believe will see evidence of God's presence everywhere. They will experience breakthroughs even in the midst of struggles. They will see opportunities where others see obstacles. They will move with confidence because their minds are wired for faith, not fear. But the opposite is also true. Every hour, someone chooses to let doubt take over. They allow their fears to dictate their actions. They step away from faith, little by little, until they find themselves completely disconnected. And in that moment of separation, they experience the greatest loss, not just of blessings or opportunities, but of divine connection itself. But there is always a choice. No one is doomed to unbelief. No one is trapped in doubt forever. The same way a person can train themselves to expect failure, they can also train themselves to expect faith. The key is intention. The key is discipline. The key is refusing to let unbelief dictate reality. You have the power to change your thoughts. You have the ability to break the cycle of doubt. But it requires action. It requires daily renewal, daily surrender, and a commitment to seeing beyond what the eyes can perceive. Because faith is not just belief, it is an unshakable certainty that what God has promised is already unfolding, whether or not you can see it yet. The choice is yours. Every hour, someone steps into faith and someone else falls into unbelief. Which one will you be? The greatest battles in life are not fought in the physical world. They are not waged in the places we can see, touch, or hear. They happen in the mind, in the thoughts we allow to take root, in the beliefs we entertain, and in the silent conversations we have with ourselves every single day. People often look for external reasons for their struggles, but the real war is internal. The mind is the battlefield, and whatever controls the mind controls the person. Everything begins as a thought. Every action, every decision, every habit, before it manifests in the physical, it first exists in the mind. And this is where the danger of unbelief is most powerful. It does not strike suddenly. It does not announce itself with warning signs. It creeps in quietly, shaping thoughts, altering perspectives, and weakening faith before a person even realizes what is happening. Doubt does not need to destroy a person instantly. It only needs to plant seeds. A single moment of hesitation, a single thought questioning whether God is truly present, whether his promises are real, whether prayer even matters. These small, seemingly insignificant thoughts begin to build a foundation, and the mind, designed to reinforce what it believes, starts looking for evidence to confirm those doubts. The moment a person starts entertaining the thought that they are alone, that their prayers are unheard, that their faith is pointless, their mind begins to prove it. The human brain is wired for patterns. It seeks to align reality with belief. This is why two people can go through the exact same situation but experience it completely differently. One sees a test of faith, while the other sees abandonment. One finds strength in the struggle, while the other sinks into despair. The difference is not in what they are going through. The difference is in how their mind has been conditioned to respond. And this is where many people lose the battle before it even begins. They assume that faith is simply about what they feel in the moment. But faith is not an emotion, it is a choice. It is a conscious decision to reject doubt, to silence fear, to refuse to let negative thoughts take control. The enemy of faith does not need to remove God from your life. He only needs to convince you that God is distant, because the moment you believe that, you will begin to live as if it is true. This is why unbelief is so dangerous. It does not just affect the mind, it affects actions. A person who doubts prays differently. They worship differently. They expect differently. And what they expect, they receive. If you expect God to move, you will see evidence of his movement everywhere. If you expect nothing, you will see nothing, not because God is not present, but because the mind has been conditioned to filter him out. The battlefield of the mind is where destinies are shaped. Every great breakthrough begins with a thought, every downfall begins with a thought, and every hour, people are making decisions in this invisible war, either choosing to strengthen their faith or allowing unbelief to take another step forward. It is never just one moment. It is a series of choices, a gradual weakening of trust, a slow drift into spiritual blindness. But here is the truth. The mind can be rewired. It is not permanent. The same way a person can train themselves into unbelief, they can train themselves back into faith. The brain is adaptable. The neurons that fire together wire together. If you repeatedly allow doubt to dominate your thoughts, you strengthen its hold. But if you deliberately choose faith, if you speak truth over your life, if you renew your mind daily, faith becomes your default. No one is immune to doubt. Everyone faces moments of weakness. But the difference between those who remain strong and those who fall is not whether doubt comes, it is what they do with it when it arrives. Some entertain it, others reject it. Some allow it to grow, others confront it with truth. And that single decision, repeated over time, determines everything. The question is, what are you allowing to take root in your mind? Are you reinforcing faith or are you reinforcing doubt? Because whatever you nurture will grow, and whatever grows will shape your life. Every hour, a decision is made. Every hour, someone chooses faith, and someone else falls deeper into unbelief. Which side of the battle will you choose? Fear and faith operate in the exact same way. Both require belief in something that hasn't yet happened. Both shape the way a person sees the world, the way they make decisions, and ultimately the way they experience life. The only difference is their direction. One leads to growth, the other to destruction. One opens doors, the other closes them. One brings light, the other brings darkness. And every hour, people are choosing between the two, often without even realizing it. The human mind is incredibly powerful. It does not distinguish between what is real and what is imagined. When a person believes in something strongly enough, their brain begins to process it as truth. This is why someone who lives in fear constantly finds evidence to justify their fears. They expect betrayal, so they become hyper aware of every small sign of rejection. They expect failure, so they hesitate before opportunities, convincing themselves it won't work. They expect struggle, so they remain stuck, never daring to step forward. The same is true for faith. A person who chooses to believe will always find proof that God is working, even in the smallest details. They will see his hand in their daily lives, not because he's suddenly started moving, but because their eyes have been opened to recognize it. They pray with expectation, and because they expect answers, they notice them. They take risks because they trust that even if they fall, they will be caught. They walk with confidence, not because their circumstances are perfect, but because their belief is unshaken. This is why what you focus on matters. The mind reinforces whatever it is repeatedly exposed to. If a person constantly surrounds themselves with negativity, doubt, and fear, that is what their brain will become wired to expect. But if they feed themselves faith, if they guard their thoughts, if they choose to meditate on truth rather than fear, their mind will begin to reflect that faith in every area of their life. Many people assume that their struggles come from external forces, their job, their relationships, their environment. But most of the time, the real struggle is internal. It is the battle between faith and fear, between belief and doubt. And the result of that battle determines everything. Two people can go through the same hardship, yet one will grow from it, while the other will be destroyed by it. The difference is not in the situation, but in the mindset. Fear weakens a person's ability to act. It keeps them stuck in hesitation, constantly second-guessing themselves. It convinces them that playing it safe is the best option, even when safety means missing out on the very opportunities God placed before them. And the more a person gives in to fear, the stronger it becomes. It takes control of their decisions, their habits, their relationships, and their spiritual life, slowly pulling them away from the abundant life they were meant to have. But just as fear grows through repetition, so does faith. The more a person chooses to believe, the stronger that belief becomes. The more they step forward in confidence, the more natural it feels. And just like fear, faith begins to influence everything. It shapes decisions, opens doors, strengthens relationships, and deepens spiritual connection. It does not mean that challenges disappear, but it does mean that the person is no longer controlled by them. Every hour, people make unconscious choices. They either strengthen their faith or reinforce their fears. They either trust God's promises or allow doubt to take root. And whatever they choose, their mind will follow. The question is, what are you feeding? What are you reinforcing? Because whatever you give attention to will grow, and whatever grows will define your life. The choice is always there. No one is forced into fear. No one is locked into unbelief forever. The power to shift from doubt to faith is in every decision, in every thought, in every moment. But it requires intentionality. It requires training the mind to expect breakthrough, to see opportunities, to walk in confidence even when the path is unclear. Because faith is not just a belief, it is an active force that changes everything. Every hour, someone steps into fear and someone else steps into faith. Which one will you be? The mind is not fixed, it is not set in stone, it is not limited to the way it has always been. Science has already proven what faith has always taught. Transformation is possible. The way a person thinks today is not the way they have to think tomorrow. The beliefs they hold, the fears they entertain, the doubts they struggle with, all of these can be changed. The brain is adaptable, it can be rewired, and the greatest evidence of this is seen in faith. Every thought a person has creates a connection in the brain. The more that thought is repeated, the stronger the connection becomes. If a person constantly dwells on fear, their brain becomes wired to respond to life with anxiety. If they continuously focus on failure, they begin to expect it. But the same is true for faith. A person who intentionally trains their mind to believe will develop a natural response of trust, confidence, and certainty. Their mind will be wired for faith, and because of that, their life will reflect it. The problem is that most people do not realize how much power they have over their own thinking. They assume that their thoughts are automatic, that doubt is just part of who they are, that fear is something they must live with, but none of this is true. The mind can be reprogrammed. The subconscious can be reshaped, and it all begins with intentionality. Faith does not happen by accident. It is a deliberate choice, a conscious decision to reject fear, to silence doubt, to override the old patterns of unbelief. Every time a person chooses to believe, they are creating new pathways in their brain. They are strengthening the connections that support faith and weakening the ones that support fear. And over time, the brain adapts. What once felt unnatural becomes automatic. What once required effort becomes second nature. Faith becomes the default instead of doubt. This is why Scripture emphasizes renewing the mind. It is not just about spiritual encouragement, it is about literal transformation. The way a person thinks determines how they experience life. A renewed mind does not see obstacles as dead ends, it sees them as opportunities for God to move. A renewed mind does not focus on lack, it expects provision. A renewed mind does not entertain fear, it stands firm in faith. And once this shift happens, everything changes. The mistake many people make is assuming that faith is just about emotion. They wait to feel it. They assume that if they don't feel confident, they don't have faith. But faith is not a feeling, it is an action. It is a decision to believe even when doubt tries to creep in. It is a commitment to train the mind daily, to guard what enters it, to be intentional about what is spoken, thought, and believed. Every hour, people reinforce something. They are either reinforcing faith or reinforcing fear. They are either strengthening their connection to God or weakening it. And the direction they choose determines their future. Because the mind is the source of everything. A person cannot live a faith-filled life if their thoughts are constantly filled with doubt. They cannot experience breakthrough if they are always expecting failure. But the good news is, no one is stuck. No one is permanently wired for unbelief. The same way doubt was created, it can be undone. The same way fear became a habit, it can be broken. But it takes consistency. It takes a daily commitment to shift the focus, to reject the lies, to embrace the truth, to declare what is unseen as if it already exists. And the more this is done, the more the brain aligns with it. This is how transformation happens, not overnight, but through daily choices, not by chance, but by intention. And with every choice, a person is either stepping deeper into faith or falling further into doubt. The battle is in the mind. The power is in the decision. Every hour, someone is rewiring their mind for faith, and someone else is reinforcing their fears. Which one will you be? Every thought a person entertains creates a ripple effect in their life. What begins in the mind does not stay there. It influences emotions, decisions, actions, and ultimately destiny. This is why the enemy does not need to attack a person physically to destroy them. He only needs to infiltrate their thinking. If he can distort their perception of truth, he can control their reality. If he can plant the seed of unbelief, he can keep them from ever walking in the fullness of their faith. It happens so subtly that most people do not even recognize it. A single doubtful thought, a single compromise in belief, a single moment of hesitation, that is all it takes. The mind begins to justify it, to normalize it, to make it feel reasonable. And what once seemed impossible to question now becomes the default mode of thinking. A person does not lose faith overnight. It happens gradually through small, seemingly harmless thoughts that eventually build into a mindset of unbelief. This is why Scripture warns so strongly against being deceived. Deception is not obvious. If it were, no one would fall for it. It works by making lies feel like truth, by twisting reality just enough to make a person second guess what they once knew. And once the mind accepts a distortion, it begins to reinforce it. The brain does not argue with what it believes. It finds ways to prove it. If a person starts believing that God is distant, their mind will highlight every unanswered prayer, every disappointment, every delay as evidence. If they start believing that they are unworthy, they will unconsciously reject blessings, sabotage opportunities, and push away love. And this is the danger, because the moment a person accepts a lie as truth, they begin to live according to it. Their actions follow their beliefs. A person who doubts God does not pray with expectation. A person who believes they are unloved does not walk in confidence. A person who assumes they will fail does not take risks. The external life always mirrors the internal reality. But deception does not only distort self-perception, it distorts how a person sees God. Instead of viewing him as a loving father, they start to see him as distant, silent, uninterested. Instead of trusting his plans, they begin to question them. Instead of standing firm in faith, they waver. And in that space of uncertainty, fear takes control. The enemy's goal is not just to make a person doubt themselves. It is to make them doubt God. Because if he can separate them from their source of strength, he can keep them weak, lost, and ineffective. This is why it is critical to guard the mind, not passively, but intentionally. No one drifts into faith. They must fight for it. They must filter their thoughts, challenge every lie, reject anything that contradicts truth. They must choose daily to reinforce faith, to renew their mind, to speak life over themselves, even when circumstances try to say otherwise. Because if they do not take control of their thoughts will take control of them. But here is the truth that many miss. Just as deception is learned, so is discernment. A person can train their mind to recognize falsehoods, to identify when the enemy is at work, to resist the subtle drift into unbelief. The more they fill their thoughts with truth, the harder it becomes for lies to take hold. The more they align their mind with God's promises, the less room there is for fear. The more they make faith a habit, the more natural it becomes. This is the difference between those who remain strong and those who fall away. Not that one is never tempted to doubt, but that one refuses to let doubt take root. One guards their thoughts while the other entertains them. One chooses faith while the other lets fear win. And every hour, these decisions shape destinies. The question is, which voice are you allowing to define your life? The voice of truth or the voice of deception? Because whatever you accept will become your reality, and whatever becomes your reality will determine your future. Every hour, someone is breaking free from deception, and someone else is falling deeper into it. Which one will you be? Every action a person takes is rooted in their belief system. Whether they realize it or not, Their decisions, their habits, their responses to life are all shaped by what they hold as truth. The problem is, not everyone questions what they believe. Not everyone stops to ask themselves, is this truth or is this just something I accepted as truth? And because of that, many people live their entire lives controlled by beliefs that were never meant to define them. The mind is powerful, but it is also programmable. Whatever is repeated enough times becomes its foundation. If a person has been taught to fear, fear will feel natural. If they have been taught to expect failure, that expectation will become their reality. The brain does not question what it has been conditioned to believe. It simply operates according to the instructions it has been given. And this is why so many people remain stuck, not because they are incapable of change, but because they are unaware that their thoughts have trapped them in a cycle. But there is something even more dangerous than a mind that is programmed for fear, and that is a person who refuses to renew their mind. Because at any moment, change is possible. At any moment, a person can choose to break free from destructive thinking, to reject the lies, to step into truth. But not everyone does. Some hold on to old patterns because they feel familiar. Some resist transformation because it requires effort. Some even defend their limitations because they have lived with them for so long that they have mistaken them for part of their identity. This is where many fall, not because they were destined to, but because they refuse to let go of the very things that were destroying them. God does not force transformation on anyone. He provides the truth, but it must be accepted. He offers freedom, but it must be received. He calls people to step into a new way of thinking, but he will never drag them into it. And this is why every hour people either move closer to truth or further away from it. Not because of fate, but because of choice. The most dangerous deception is the one a person refuses to acknowledge. It is not the lie that sneaks in unnoticed, but the one that is embraced, protected, and justified. It is the belief that convinces someone that change is impossible. It is the thought that tells them they are too far gone, too broken, too unworthy, and as long as they hold on to that, they will never step into the life they were meant to live. But the truth is, transformation is always available. The mind is not fixed. It is not beyond repair. It is not locked into a single way of thinking forever. At any moment, a person can make the decision to believe differently, to see differently, to act differently. And once they do, everything shifts. The patterns that once held them back begin to break. The fears that once controlled them start to lose power. The doubts that once silenced them fade in the presence of renewed faith. This is not just theory, it is reality. The brain adapts to whatever it is given. If a person begins to meditate on truth, their mind will align with it. If they start declaring victory instead of defeat, they will begin to walk in confidence. If they refuse to entertain fear, fear will lose its grip. And over time, this new way of thinking will not just be something they practice, it will become who they are. But none of this happens without a decision. No one drifts into transformation. No one stumbles into a renewed mind by accident. It requires intentional effort. It requires consistency. It requires a willingness to challenge old beliefs, to reject what no longer serves them, to actively build the mindset that aligns with faith instead of fear. This is the dividing line between those who step into freedom and those who remain bound. Not their past, not their circumstances, not their struggles, but their willingness to let go of the old and embrace the new. Every hour, people either renew their mind or reinforce their limitations. Every hour, someone is stepping into transformation and someone else is rejecting it. Which one will you be?